in, and I want to thank OCBC for having us facilitate today's HRTC meeting. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Jeff. All right. Give me 1 second. And go ahead and take some time to introduce yourself in the chat and say your name and where you're from and who you're representing. All righty. Yes, happy Friday. Y si ustedes pueden tomar, si habla español y necesita traducción, va a estar traducción hoy en español o otro lenguaje. Puedes cambiar la lenguaje que está debajo. Dice una caja que lleva CC y le puedes escoger la lenguaje, el idioma en español. Buenos días todos, soy Trista Carter, representando California Forward y está con aquí está es David también con California Forward. Okay, and so we're gonna go ahead and get started. For non-HRTC members, we're also taking comments, public comments. Anything going on that you would like to share? You can take yourself on mute or raise your hand as well. All right.
Yes, I'd like to say something quick. Tomorrow is the largest trash pickup day in the country and in the world. It's the Coastal Cleanup Day. It's in Orange County. Our organization is managing 38 different sites, both coastal and inland. And so it's during the morning from 9 to noon. And so if anybody or your organizations want to take a stab to volunteer to go out and clean up our rivers and our coast, the invitation is open. And go on our website and you can find all the sites and everything you need to know. Thank you.
Gary, is there a way for you to drop that in the chat?
Pardon?
Is there a way for you to drop that in the chat?
Sure, I will.
That'd be very helpful as well, I'm sure.
Perfect. All right, hearing no other comments. For HRTC members, any updates on programs, activities that are related to the principles and values of SERVE? Go ahead and raise your hand or unmute yourself. All right, hearing that there are none other updates or anything like that, we're going to get started.
So we have one from Tony. Sorry.
Oh, there you go. Hi, Tony.
Hello. I think my hand is looks too much like my rug.
Yeah, I did not see that.
I just wanted to say today is the day that California celebrates Native American Heritage Day at the state capitol. And so the American Indian Chamber and a lot of other groups are at the Capitol. As soon as we finish this today, I'm on my way. I'll put the link to the event in the chat.
Awesome. That is so great and monumental to be able to celebrate all cultures and diversity, especially our Native American Indians here in the United States. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. All righty. Anyone else want to share anything? Anything exciting and good going on? Miss Melanie, she shared Banning Ranch Conservancy is also hosting a site coastal cleanup. Also National Public Lands Day. So she put a link in the chat for details for that as well. Awesome. All right, Jesse, we are going to get started. The agenda is also in the chat. Catherine dropped that in. If you need to follow along, we're going to get started with the theory of change. There will be a vote required at the end of this as well. So go ahead, Jesse.
Yeah, thank you. Let me switch over here. So, sorry, give me, it's loading. Apologies. But just as it loads, right? So you have a this was presented to all the regional conveners, the state does ask the regional conveners to come together once a month for a community of practice. And so what you have in your agenda packet is the full deck, but I wanted to shorten it again, just for the sake of time. And so the state has a consultant that will develop a logic model for all of SURF. And so as I sent in an email, for those who are interested in participating, it is open to any HRTC member. If you wanted to participate in developing this theory of change for the whole state, you are more than welcome to. If you are still interested, I'm happy to forward on the invitation. I believe I forwarded it over to everyone who expressed interest, but if you are interested, but as I have a slide, there is, it is optional for each region to try to develop one with this consultant as well. And so I just wanted to make sure people were aware of what a logic model is. And I would just probably go to a logic model again as a graphic depiction of your organization that identifies its resource, programming, and intended outcomes. It shows the relationship between your program's activities and expected outcomes, and provides an overview of your organization that can serve as a roadmap for strategic planning. So this is kind of like what it helps with. And these are kind of all the different things, program planning, program management, communication, because a picture is worth 1,000 words. So, we've tried to explain SURF in, I think we don't have a 1-pager, but we have a 3-pager because it's complicated, but maybe just one infographic can explain all of it and some of the moving pieces much easier than, again, in written word. I think it allows the group to kind of come together on some common principles and outcomes. And then it does help with fundraising. I think there are people in the philanthropy space who could speak better to this, but it's something that I think it helps. Again, if you're philanthropy and you're trying to identify why would you invest in something, this is very helpful to have one of those. And here are here are the different components. Here are the different components that would go into a logic model, where we would have to work with the consultant on identifying the inputs, the outputs, and then ultimately the outcomes. But this is again a process to plan and try to synthesize the stuff that we're doing. And I think this is probably the best slide, is because here's an example of one that I believe either, which you'll see in the right-hand corner, the Mark USA is one of the primary consultant, along with a department within USC, on what a theory of change would look like. And as mentioned in some of the other things, right, you see the short-term outcomes listed, you see the medium-term outcomes, you see long-term impacts, you see principles. This is obviously not necessarily the format that the states will look like when they do their SURF project, or the way they do their theory of change and logic model, nor would it necessarily look the same for ours. But I'll let this sit here, but this is kind of what we would be working towards. So I'll give just a moment for people to review.
Jesse, are we going to get this in our follow-up packet?
Yeah, I mean, you have a more extensive deck slide already in the packet.
Yeah, okay,
I didn't want to go through every slide and repeat it. I wanted just to get down to what I thought were the most critical slides, just for the sake of time. But yes, obviously, feel free to review then as well. And so the question is, again, is to each region is like, do we want to do one of these? So we can reach out to the consultant in order to do one just for our region, do a theory of change and a logic model just for our region. These can be helpful endeavors, but just out of the sake of transparency, I think the question that we also have to consider is, like, when are we going to do this and what I think has already been communicated, an ambitious timeline? Is it done through a subcommittee? Are they coming and presenting, and this is another meeting we'll have to add as a working group? Are we adding it to an already scheduled meeting and pushing things back? I think that's one of the major considerations, as well as we think about, doing this and moving forward. Just to, again, as someone who is working through this, one of my, I guess, if I do have a concern, that would be it. And so just with that, again, thoughts, questions, comments, I can either take it back to the consultant if you kind of want to learn more. I can, but again, after that, are there any thoughts, questions, or comments? And I can.
Hey, Jesse.
I should probably leave it up at this point. Yeah, Andrew.
Is there a idea of what the process would be to develop the logic model? Is there would it take a certain amount of meetings, or is there a survey, or what do we have as a sense of engaging with stakeholders and figuring out, putting it together?
Yeah, that's a great. So there is no set, just because it's totally up to each region. So if Orange County chooses to do it, but LA doesn't have to. We can reach out to try to understand how they choose to sequence it. So I don't have that answer for you, but if there is an appetite to try to proceed with this, I can try to get what might be the logistics of this and then bring it back to the HRTC to see if we truly want to move forward, given the commitments and the demands in order to execute this. I see. Yeah, Tony.
Yeah, I would at whatever point makes sense, make a motion that we should try to find more information about this with a presentation to learn more, and that I would, the second part of the motion would be that it would be done as a subgroup so that people could determine what their level of engagement was, and that the subgroup would then bring a proposal back to the broader group to talk through options for how it might be implemented, rather than just have a subgroup to go do it, but that they would kind of conceptualize it and bring it back for everybody.
Okay. So before we move on that motion, though, I think Josefa and Linda, if you have just comments or discussions to the broader point, then we can reconsider that motion. Josefa.
Sure. Thank you, Jesse. So again, this is coming from a beginner's mind, still learning in this whole government structure thing. But as I looked at your model, obviously we're familiar with inputs and outputs and activities. But the part that I don't really see in government is the concern with the outcomes, because when we do grant reports and grant applications, I feel like it's all about the activities and the outputs and where do the outcomes lie. And so that's just a commentary and question of like, why does it matter for outcomes if we're not, if this is a 3-year, 2-year grant cycle, and where do we come out on that? And I guess continuing that with that, what's the implication on sort of funded projects if we're aiming at outputs and activities rather than outcomes?
So,
and maybe I'm misinterpreting it, and maybe I'm not as familiar with this, but that's just my perception.
It's definitely a question I can bring back. I mean, so Christy with the state, Christy, of course, I think you're on the panel view. So if you feel like you have answers, feel free to unmute and answer them. If not, she can go back to her team with these questions.
Yeah, good morning. So that question is definitely layered. There's a lot of different, I would say the answer that probably is the most basic level to that question is, what SURF is hoping to do is really bring the region together and bring a lot of people who have never been at the table together before. That's pretty much the basic level goal and outcome to SURF. But of course, I can definitely take this back to the team. I know the answer is definitely layered as well. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Well, and I'll just push it a little bit further, that if we don't sort of confront this issue at something as significant as SURF, where can we, right? Because I feel like a lot of our systems and infrastructure is built to produce outputs and activities rather than the end game. And that's why we continue to be in this cycle of addressing surface issues rather than getting at the root issue. And I feel like that's why SURF should exist. If we're investing all this millions of dollars around a collaborative to think innovatively, and with the community at the center and resiliency, then we've got to start tackling that. So thanks for letting me share.
Again, that's exactly why we have a group this diverse, right? In order to voice these concerns, questions, and comments. Linda.
Yeah, I would be interested in hearing from others that have been deeply involved in the evolution of Orange County. My perception comes from about a decade worth of work here. I see the value of the theory of change logic model for what we're doing, even though it would be an additional responsibility for us. But I see it being rather imperative and essential, given the fact that for all the good things that we have been able to accomplish, we have never been very, very good at playing well together for long periods of time in a sustainable fashion. And to Josepha's point and your point, the diversity of this group that's brought together for SURF. I mean, this is a huge opportunity for us to come together and find those points of intersection and intentionality about what we want to see in our region. So I would be supportive of, with all due respect, Tony, I'm not sure I want to talk very much more about this and, sort of gnaw it to death. I think there's value in bringing this intellectual capital to the table to talk about developing a logic model that's right for us and reflective of us.
Yeah, any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I would second the motion. I definitely need a lot more information on the overall benefit of this effort. And so I second the motion.
Cesar.
Good morning, everybody. I would second the motion, but I would also, pardon me, support the motion, but I will also want to make sure that the consultant has complete feedback from the diverse group. So these commentaries, and if we need to have subsequent meetings to make sure that we all are bringing our concerns to the table and expressing how the model should work, and it's representative of our collective work, I think that's going to be really important.
Any other last questions or comments?
So Jesse, is what we're asking is that they would, they're not doing the model for us. They're going to prepare a, they're going to tell us about how the model might work within our environment. Right. Okay. And
Yeah.
so I wouldn't, and now I think that Linda's point of our time is precious. I don't know what people would feel like if we said, okay, what if we had a sub meeting for the consultant to come and make that presentation, with the understanding that the subgroup would come back with a proposal. I don't know. I totally respect people's time. I don't want to weigh down the meetings that these are, like, I think some of the best SURF meetings because they're substantive as well as process. So does someone have a suggestion on how we might combine those things to both learn more, have a subgroup come up with a proposal that they could bring back? Does everyone want to hear more about it, or, what works for people?
Yes, Anna.
Hi, good morning. I don't have a process proposal or anything like that, but just to add to the feedback, I feel in support of exploring a logic model, especially if it helps us like bring together everything from like the multiple stakeholders here, the community input that has been gathered, and that it could help us, yeah, just kind of chart and organize like what can come out of a huge effort like this. I'm trying to, I want to recall and bring in, we worked in the Santa Ana Building Healthy Communities Initiative for 10 years, and it started with a logic model that wasn't well received by the community because it felt like either things were already set, ahead of time for folks. It felt like it wasn't visually, it's not super appealing or understandable. It's a bunch of boxes in and a flow chart. So I think I would just want to like warn that that it's something usable, adaptable, that we can make it, graphically appealing. Just that it has some use, and it also doesn't set in things into stone. So I see a lot of value in helping us like organize everything, and just wanted to bring in that prior experience that hopefully it's not everything for us, and we're still, adaptable along the way. Oh, and I can say, I mean, it sounds like we don't know enough yet, perhaps, for the process of how to go about this. So I don't know if the first step could be like, let's hear back what, what they proposed, what it could look like, and then maybe we can discuss like who can take it on or how.
I'm sure we could get, well, I guess this is where, I mean, there's going to be a motion for this move, or we could try to maybe set up a survey after, because I know we could do that, but then it's like, does the consultant present to this whole group? Does the consultant present, again, like as Tony's recommending, to a subcommittee to then make a recommendation to the group? Or maybe I do it all, try to get it all in writing and try to summarize it for people to then, maybe we just vote electronically. I think that's totally understood. I was just working off the information that was provided to me. However, I guess like the next step is how do we proceed? Is it in what some of the recommendations, or do I try to do, or other staff try to do a lot of the legwork to present to all of you, or do we just have them present directly to this group in a pretty near future meeting? What are people's recommendations on proceeding? I guess it's clear the sentiment is explore more, but I guess it's like, does people have on how we want to do that? Yes, Melanie.
I was just going to say, if you pick a meeting date, offer it out to anyone who can attend, and have it recorded so that if folks couldn't attend, they can watch it after the fact. But I support proceeding and getting more information as well.
Is there maybe a second to having an optional meeting again where it's recorded for people to learn more who are interested?
I second the motion. This is Deborah Sanchez, City of Santa Ana.
So yeah, Trista, do you want to try to see what the...
Yeah. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye. Or is there any excuse me, abstentions or disagreements? All right, so seeing that there are none, the motion moves for an approval.
Okay, just for a point of clarification, I heard two motions. There was a motion and a second on the floor already to have a subcommittee. Then there was another motion. So what are we voting on?
From my understanding, based on the discussion and feedback, it would be on the second motion.
Well,
so yeah,
I think we might need to take another vote and clarify that,
Okay,
because I
so
was
let's
going off of Tony's motion.
Yeah, okay, so let's clarify and put the I think it was Tony who made the original.
Yes.
And I put it, I'm happy to have modifications, but I did type it and put it in the chat if it's helpful.
Let's do that. Just real quick, Emily, can you just put it, we'll actually do this electronically. Can you go ahead and put Tony's motion in a link for the survey, and then we will get that vote. So one moment while, again, our colleague will, we have a survey platform that we'll use in order to make this more clear. So can you use Tony's language, Emily, and drop that in the chat?
And this is the motion that you put in the chat box that said we want to explore this and bring the consultant in and so forth, correct?
Well, yeah. So if you click on the link now, the language will be there. It's so right with Tony just saying request further presentation by the consultant, establish a subgroup to develop a draft plan for consideration by the HRTC. That is what's on the table. And again, the link is in the chat if you can go ahead and access that and cast your vote. Again, this is not final because some of your colleagues are not present and they will have the opportunity to vote electronically as well, but this will give us a sense of where the group is at. Emily, can you drop it again? Maybe. I think you might have to copy and paste. There's a way to do it as a link and not for them to copy and paste.
Yeah, you have to copy and paste.
Yeah. Sorry, it seems like I don't know why the chat won't allow it as a. There we go. Thank you, Michael.
There we go, Michael.
Wow. Enough people will get tech movement. Thank you so much.
Perfect. And then Emily, just let me know when all votes are cast.
And then can you, yeah, Emily, then share screen so people see the current results, but again, people will have the opportunity who are not present at this moment to vote as well. So we can't say it's a conclusive vote, but it'll give us a sense of where the group is.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, Anna.
Is the subgroup open to everyone or anyone?
Oh.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Can you just share at this point and see what the results are? And then again, we'll confirm after people have the opportunity to vote electronically. Okay, so pretty overwhelming so far. It seems like even the people who are absent probably couldn't change the outcome of this, but again, we will confirm them. We will confirm that and send everyone the final motion or the final results. Can you stop share now?
So we'll wait for the final four, as Jesse said, for the few, but we'll follow up with the subcommittee information as well.
We do have someone in the chat that's so they weren't able to vote.
Yeah, Emily, can you work with Desiree directly? Can you directly message her to get her? Again, this is still open. We're not closing it to be able to. And same thing with Catherine.
Yeah, so if you're unable to vote, just directly message Emily so she can work with you. I'm not sure what happened.
It looks like the platform has a limit.
Ah.
Okay,
There are several people that are saying the votes aren't allowed. So you've reached the maximum participation.
Thank you, Emily. Can we fix that?
Same thing.
Sure. Emily, can you fix that? And then we will.
Yes, I'll fix that.
All right. So now I think for those of you who haven't, I think you should be able to now.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to the next agenda item. So in the packet, there's a template letter of support from the city of Fullerton on a state grant that they applied for. They needed the letter a few weeks ago. And although you didn't submit, the HRTC did not submit a letter of support, but the request had made you guys think about that it would be good to consider whether or not you want to provide letters of support for funding that aren't specifically SURF related. And so this question would be to you as the HRTC members of the HRTC. Is this something that you would like to consider for these requests? And if yes, what would be the process to considering approval? So this is you'll see it in your packet, just an example, just considering those options.
In short, if we are asked to weigh in on projects in Orange County, does this group even want to consider it? These are non-SURF-related projects. This is not catalyst. This is not implementation. But if people find value of getting the support of this group, do we even want to consider like these projects, these proposals, and these letters? Any initial thoughts or comments from people?
What might be? Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I'm going to say that I think that we should consider it because even, in certain grants, like just the California Hub, for instance, that talked about being involved in SURF. So people having a letter of support can be helpful for those types of grants that the state is requesting that they be a part of or be involved with the program.
So I think these kind of letters can be really helpful, but as an inclusive organization, there may be questions or support being asked by for proposals that not everybody in the HRTC might understand how that works. So maybe we should have a policy that says you can make the request, but you also need to establish an office hour so that if groups wanted to learn more, they would have that option. And then the other question I wasn't sure is, were we saying that the SURF in and of itself would be writing a letter of support, or is the or is the group making a request of, would the HRTC partners consider sending their own letters? Because I think that's two different pieces.
It would be, well, that could be considered as well. Initially, this was brought up as a collective body, the decision of the collective body. But I think, of course, if we wanted to explore the second one as well, where it's optional for every one of you, it's just being brought to your attention to write on your individual letter of support on behalf of your organization.
Well, I would say that if it's the first, then we need to have a very specific process with fact sheets and multiple opportunities. Because one of the, some of us have a background in government, and we regularly, or in foundations, and we regularly go through these things, and it's like click, click, click. I know this person, I know that person. But if the HRTC itself is writing a letter, essentially standing in for everybody that's here. And I would hate to push out voices, make it look like, oh, this is the inclusive choice. I don't know how you can't do that. I'm not suggesting that Fullerton doesn't need their school. I'm just saying that that's a much bigger thing. So maybe we need to think of a process so that, and maybe the process needs to come from groups that are representing disinvested communities and the disinvested community members, that maybe they need to agree on what would make them feel comfortable before we essentially put their voice on something.
Great points, Tony. I mean, that's why it's surfaced with us. So the discussion about process, people like what Tony recommended, people have other thoughts and opinions. Yeah, Kate.
Thanks. I served on the OC tax board for a while. They would get a lot of requests for endorsing school bonds, that sort of thing. They had guidelines that they established that projects had to meet these things, however many there were. And then it wasn't so much where OC Tax would endorse a bond. They would just write a letter that says it's in alignment with our standards or our guidelines. It might be easier to have something like that as opposed to the HRTC is endorsing this project or supporting this project. We're dancing in the gray area, but it might be a little bit easier with the size of this group to have the work will be in figuring out what those standards are, but we come up with a list of standards. And then when groups want to ask for our support, we can provide a letter that says this project meets HRTC's standards for community development, inclusiveness, etc. And I'm not suggesting that the list of standards be exhaustive, but we know from the SURF standards what projects should be. So it's a few things that advances the community or supports. This project shows support for underserved communities. But we could limit it to a few. But that might get us to a place that's a little more of a neutral support without compromising all the different approval processes and obligations that all the individual groups may have.
Hey, I just have to, you just spot on. You are spot on, because that's the same experience I've had, which is that it's all, and we've got all the raw material is already in our SURF. It's already there. We have, 5 things or 7 things. And that is, if somebody presents something for our support, then if it falls under one of those 7 things neatly, then we can say in good conscience that it reflects this, yes, that it's aligned with this. And that way we don't put ourselves at odds with the entire collective. So I just think that's a splendid way to go about it.
Long time, just life experience here.
But I do think this could be a good beginning opportunity to think through these processes, because we're going to need to do them when we get to phase 2, which is not us applying, but others. The other piece, though, when I've worked for elected officials, is they often will say they will not weigh in on competitive applications if the other applicant is in the region. So I think we want to kind of think through, because you can't say, oh, you know, this is good versus this other one. So we need some real good guidance people. But I really think it's got to be centered by the disinvested communities, which I know everybody's in favor of, but how can we create a process that isn't too burdensome, that is going to allow them to speak, because that's the voice. Those are the bonus points for the letters. It's not necessarily going to be the more established groups.
Andrew.
Yeah, I really appreciated Kate's comments. I think that's a good strategy to ensure that we're all aligned with the efforts as opposed to supporting or endorsing. One thing I would suggest in terms of process is to still provide like an opt-out strategy. I think some of us have public affairs departments that are, you know, really strict on what our organizations support or not support. So just being able to opt our organization out of certain letters. I don't know what that would look like exactly, if it would be just a list of HRTC members, and then if certain organizations want to opt out of a letter, they would just have to do so, and then we'd remove their logo from the letter, or whatever that process would look like. But I would suggest we add that in somewhere.
Yeah, Gary?
I would just want to go with the caveat that this would only pertain to public agencies. I wouldn't not want to see private development or other projects come to us for support because they think we would. I think it gets too far out there, and it you know, we're a large, diverse group with different opinions on things, and so. You know, I wouldn't want to oppose something and then turn around and have the HRTC supporting it with my name on it. I can see problems with that, and so, but I agree with public agencies. Fine.
Okay, so we'll think, as Andrew mentioned, a way for people to remove themselves.
Yeah,
from it. So we can think through what that might look like.
Right.
Okay.
I'll just say we're not exclusively government entities, though. So I appreciate what you're saying, Gary, but if we're going to start saying, well, we'll only look at projects that align with us if they're like this, then we just shouldn't do this. And we'll reserve it until we only look at SURF projects, because this whole HRTC has business entities. I mean, OCBC. Sure. Represents businesses. So sure. I understand the sensitivity, and I think that's what Andrew was saying by removing. But if we're gonna start limiting what projects we'll look at, then we really should consider just not support, not reviewing any non-SURF projects, and we'll just figure out a system for SURF projects.
All right. Well, this is to your point, Kate, because again, I'm just one of the things. Yeah, I know. I'm telling you, because it's just okay. I do not suggest it's good policy for us to give, 60 different members the opportunity to like extract themselves. If we can agree that this collective is here for one common purpose, and that is to move forward these 5 things or these 7 things that are already established and in the SURF HRT provision. That's why we're here. And if that becomes our benchmark and anyone submits a request to us, if it falls under any of those, any or all of those, then we would want to have SURF be a powerful voice in support of that as a collective. And you can actually put caveat language in there, which says this reflects alignment with the overarching SURF and HRT agreements. It may not, reflect the individual members of the collective, that sort of thing. I mean, we could say that, but if you start, if we do this and then we start, everybody has to look at it now and everybody has to decide whether they can support it or not, and they have to take it to their boards of directors, and then don't bother. It'll be a logistical nightmare. So I recommend that we treat this as an opportunity to bring the clout of our collective to worthy grant applications, but as Kate reminds us, that are already in alignment with the things that we're agreeing upon. Whatever difference of opinions we have about execution or tactic or strategy, but these 7 things we agree upon, we should be able to support those.
Annette.
Yes, I'm going to agree with Linda on that. I would hate for us to not do them at all, only because these things could be crucial in money coming into the area. I get, being thoughtful about how we go about that process, but I think that you'll see more and more that the state is asking for SURF to be represented as an entity that supports these different grants, again, as I just saw in the California Hub Accelerate grant. That's all.
Sarah, I saw you had your hand up briefly and then it came down. Just want to make sure that you put that down, or you're happy to make your own comments or remarks.
Yeah, I just had a quick question and a hypothetical. I definitely hear what is being said in regards to if it's in alignment with the criteria of SURF. My question would be, is there any instance where there can be alignment with SURF and a contradiction as well? I know Tony mentioned there's other things we can take account for, such as if it's competitive, or just if there's a lot of different opinions. So I was just wondering if it just brought that thought to mind, if it could be in alignment with SURF, but also contradict some of our viewpoints as well.
Well, I'll defer. I mean, like Linda and Kate and Tony, I don't want to miscorrectly restate, but I think the idea is that it would be, I guess, unanimously like in alignment with SURF, right? That's where it would help keep the group together, because we're all here based on certain principles. Or at least each organization's mission at least strives for some part of SURF. And so if these projects kind of check all the boxes, in theory, every organization would naturally be supportive of it. I think that's the hope and expectation. But kind of also to your question is right. Like in some ways, although these are not SURF specific projects, if they check all the boxes, they could hypothetically be eligible for SURF implementation funding as well. That would be an opportunity for that, depending on, again, their timelines and whether they needed more funding. But inherently, it would be SURF eligible because we already consider them be checking all the boxes. But I apologize if I misstated anything.
I just wanted to clarify, Jesse. I'm trying very hard to say we're not supporting something. If a non-SURF project wants HRTC's support, or what we can do is say your project is in alignment with SURF guidelines. And if people want to interpret that as support, then so be it. But I want to be careful that with what I'm proposing is not supporting or opposing or endorsing. It's just acknowledging that a group came to us and we said, yes, what you have proposed meets the guidelines of what our group is trying to do. Trying to thread the needle there.
Yeah, I think, Tony, one last one, and then maybe we'll try to see if Kate, that is a motion, and we'll see if we'll get a second to that. Tony, do you have a?
Yeah, I do. I just know that the American Indian Chamber of Commerce of California is very sensitive about other groups speaking for Native Americans, and that Native Americans need to voice their own opinion. And so I understand why these letters can be very helpful, and I understand why standards are very good. but there needs to be some sort of protection that a group can't come in and say, oh, look, my application shows that I'm in alignment with all of your really valuable things, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's how it gets implemented, or that our letter in somehow validates a voice that invalidates somebody else. So I just know that we're very, very sensitive about that, and that lots of people like to speak for particularly American Indians, because we're very, I'm a non-native. I am a person who brings information to them and they tell me what they want. So I just raise that we don't want to shut down voices because we're more organized.
Well, then with that, is there something that you think we, to the group, someone wants to move on, or do we want to allow me to digest all these notes and kind of summarize all of this input, and maybe then take up a motion or a vote at the next meeting, or a near next meeting, or near future meeting? What are people's thoughts?
So I'll make a motion, I guess, motion / suggestion that not to assign you work, Jesse, but that for the next meeting, a proposed guideline and process be developed for reviewing for alignment of non-SURF related projects. That's the motion. And the direction would be, Jesse, you know, if there's like a rough template of a letter you could share, if you could just like, and in that letter, it's, you know, the HRTC represents these organizations. These are the goals of SURF projects. We found this project to be in alignment with the major goal, you know, just something like that. I'm not putting the full burden of the process and the standards on you, but just something that we can start looking at. So my motion is that we review a possible process and letter for acknowledgement purposes of non-SURF related projects.
Perfect, thank you. Jesse, did you want to have Emily put that in a e-vote, or would you like to just do it the verbal, how we've been doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it seems like even from comments from the chat that like Kate there's a strong consensus there, but we still would need a second. I think we could just do that again if there's any significant observations.
Can we have a second on the floor?
I second that motion.
Perfect. Any nays? Any abstentions? All in favor?
Would you repeat the motion, please?
Oh. Go ahead, Kate. Can you
Me disculpo con ustedes, no encontré la traducción, solamente me da la opción en inglés, y la verdad casi he entendido muy poco, y no sé aquí las opciones que tengo para emitir mi voto.
Okay, las opciones no están debajo.
No, para emitir, o sea, la verdad no sé, para emitir el voto.
Oh, okay. Emily, can we make sure we have to get them also in Spanish as well? David, will you be able to work with Apolonio to get the vote cast and as well as the translation as well?
Yes,
Okay.
I'll work with it.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm writing the motion.
Perfect. Thank you.
I'm typing as fast as I can.
No worries, no worries.
I'm sure people appreciate the debrief. It's been a lot flying around. You know, kind of a mental halftime here as this gets typed in.
The conversation has been really great, and being able to be able to digest the different components to all of these motions or items on the table. So this is great. This is helpful because having this discussion is important. All right. So her motion is to review the next HRTC, a proposed process and draft letter of acknowledgement for non-served projects. Okay. So we have the motion on the floor and we had a second. Is that second still stands with Linda? Okay, perfect. And then any abstentions? Any nays? Okay, motion carries. All right, and then so our next item, excuse me. Our next item is content for the regional plan part 1. So Jesse, I'll hand that back over to you.
Yeah, so I think this will be quicker. At one of the last meetings, we tried to address this at the last meeting, but the one prior to that, right, Tony brought up how rich our small business community is, and that she requested some data. We had to submit something to the state for our regional plan part 1, which is all our research and data, but it's not final until December. So we have an opportunity to continue to improve the document or make additions to the document. So that is just us, essentially being held accountable and delivering on that. If there are, and also we held a community forum meeting that we weren't able to get all the notes together in time for that deliverable to the state. And that's what you'll see as well. If you can look at the new agenda in the chat, in one of the previous ones that got broken up, but it's really from community members what they think Orange County SWOT analysis is, what kind of industries they feel like are important to Orange County, as well as just some other questions. So that's just a summary of all the notes from about, again, 50 or 60 residents participated in that. And so we want to include that as an appendix to the report as well. So before we include anything new into the report, it was also approved by you guys that you should have to see it and approve of it. So primarily, it's just that's the new content we want to include to our regional plan part 1 draft, but we will not do so unless it's approved by this body. Yes, Tony.
Yeah, I appreciate the small business profile. I did think that the write-up, particularly on the self-employment overview, I thought starting with the paragraph with the Lyft and the Uber was, it kind of, to me, it threw off the write-up around entrepreneurship in general. And so I would suggest that first paragraph, or the focus of that concept of the concern of that piece, get brought down lower in the narrative. I mean, if that's what the researchers feel, then, okay. But it kind of shifts the entire, there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are self-employed and they're not with Lyft or Uber. So I always like the idea of starting at the general, and then if you have a specific, you go down to it.
Okay.
Thanks, Tony. That's good feedback. Hey, Dr. Kleinhans, do you want to comment on that? Dr.
Yeah, let me promote him to.
That section
yeah,
is on the Zoom. So
yeah, Dr. Kleinhans, you should be allowed to talk now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, thanks, Tony. I think that's a great idea. We can move the language around a little bit. Any other comments about the narrative?
Well, I didn't know if it was possible to add more about the makeup of who is the small business ownership. The fastest growing segments are, Latinas, Asian American women are a big segment. So I just thought of the racial, I really think that there's, just as the population in general is shifting in California, that the makeup of business ownership is rapidly shifting. And I think it's a very interesting story, and it might be something that we would want to weigh in on relative to strategies later. So that was the only piece that I, the business review that they do, every 7 years, it shows some pretty interesting numbers that way.
Right. You're talking about the economic census that comes out every so often. Yeah. So yeah. We'll see if to what extent we can drill down to the county level to get that kind of information. I know that we were trying to turn this around quickly to get it to make it available to everybody, and did not have the opportunity to check that data source. And it's The latest data would be from 2022, probably not even coming out until 23 or 24.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
no,
24, 25. So we'd be looking at, most likely looking at data from 2017 at best.
No, I agree. That's the real problem with that particular data set, but it's such a significant, I think that it would be, it's such a surprising piece of how dominant women are moving forward relative to entrepreneurship, which is, economic independence, and particularly with the demographic makeup of Orange County. I think that it puts Orange County at a real place where you do have this diverse population and as you already point out, the abundance of small businesses.
Yeah, it's already, known for its small business concentration. Although if you take a look at the numbers, everybody, you'll see that the share of very small businesses for Orange County is very close to the share for the state as a whole. But you're right, the mix is changing, and it also reflects the changing face, if you will, of the county's population. So we'll see if we can incorporate some of that into the next iteration.
Thanks. I appreciate, I appreciate it also being included.
Yes, Anna.
Thanks, Jesse.
No, yeah, we'll leave you on in case, again, anyone else has questions of the content.
Yeah, let's see. I have to confess that I still feel like I don't have my mind wrapped around all the research and would like to, and I'm working with other team members so we can make it a team effort. But I know that one of the things that I would like to be able to see or understand is like low-income immigrant populations. Where are they? In what sectors are they the largest? What industries do they tend to work with? I think that would be really important for our upcoming conversations around industry selection. All of the criteria that disinvested communities fall into, can we see where in what industries and what sectors are they working, so that we can make targeted strategies that could benefit those populations. So I'm not sure if that already exists in that straightforward way in our research yet, but it's something I would love to understand further.
That kind of detail is generally more available for population demographics and less so for the composition of industries and firms within those industries. So I'll work with Dr. Walrath to see what else we can uncover, especially at the local level. That's one of the things. There's an increasing amount of information available as it relates to local, that is to say county and city economies, their composition. But oftentimes when we look at information about firms and industries, there's relatively less stuff that tells us about the socioeconomic characteristics, for example, of the workers and socioeconomic characteristics of the owners of those firms. I mean, there's no doubt anecdotally that that minority ownership drives so much of small business and entrepreneurship. So to the extent that we can put that in the spotlight with a little bit more analysis, we'll certainly do so. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And if there's I mean, in our organization, we'd like to set up more of a research arm too that helps to gather that very local level data. So this is a long-term effort, but I'd love any advice you have around that also for how we can help contribute to that data that we know isn't super available.
Now, Wallace, you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, I said thanks. We'll do some thinking on that and get back to you. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other questions or comments on the information?
Okay, so this one is going to need a motion and require a vote as well.
So obviously we will definitely, research what's feasible. Tony, you've already made some recommendations. So again, the motion would be, do we want to include this content into the regional plan part 1 that'll ultimately get submitted to the state, recognizing that there are further follow-ups and some recommended adjustments in content.
Modifications.
I would make a motion that we include the proposed language in the report reflecting the additional language as it becomes available.
I
Perfect.
can second.
Perfect. Thank you, Anna. Any abstentions? Any nays? Motion carries. Okay, and just our last agenda item. We're moving, well, not last agenda item. We're moving along. And the process for evaluating and reviewing and selecting implementation proposals. Jesse, I'll hand that back over to you as well.
So thank you, everybody. We at the last meeting kind of discussed how we wanted to wrap our arms around, getting down to the strategies that we will ultimately submit to the state. So with some of the time before we get into those heavy conversations, I thought it was a good time to maybe think about this group considering, and again, this is just a proposal, this is not set in stone. We welcome your input and feedback on how are we going to ultimately select the projects in the first half of next year. But I also know that this is not us creating a scoring rubric. I think we have to wait to see if the state provides one first for us to work off of. This is just how are we going to receive all the proposals and how are we going to ultimately the process to selecting them, not how we're going to select each individual project per se. So this is just going to a high level, given kind of the timelines. We just want to make sure like all of you are at least proactively prepared. We can obviously bring this up at future meetings to kind of remind people of the process as we want them. And just to be honest, there will probably need to be modifications depending on, I think some things are contingent upon the state, and we'll have to make sure that they, I guess, kind of are available when we're requesting it. So at the last meeting, we, we're going to try our level best to select our strategies by the beginning of December, right? The strategies are going to be really important in providing more specificity on the projects we want to see as an HRTC, which is why the selection of strategies is so important. That even SURF as it is already pretty broad, and our strategies is a way for us, for Orange County, to see what is our focus and how to narrow that down. So then we hope that, assuming that we have the strategies ready, we can have that be a complementary document to the state's implementation SFP. That this is, of course, what the state is looking for, but just know stronger projects will be, meeting the strategy set out by you, the HRTC. And so we will want to send that out at the beginning of the year. We think it'd be helpful for there to be some sort of mandatory intent to apply. Again, the recommendation is because these projects are not catalyst projects, they should be, as the state likes to say, ready to go. It shouldn't be like as heavy as a lift for people to send in some sort of summary of the proposal. And as I said, a 2-page max summary. If they want to produce less, they can. But I think this will give the HRTC a sense of how many we've received. So are we going to receive 100? Are we going to receive 50? Are we going to receive 20? We don't know, but this will allow us to at least, put a floor there for us to start seeing what's available. I think it also, our hope is, as the state has done, make it public. So I think people can see other proposals to consider, wow, like I didn't know that this group was doing something similar. Maybe we should collaborate or try to find ways to align our projects for greater strength. So by posting it publicly, I think will allow people to, again, consider whether their proposal is strong enough or whether they should be partnering with others moving forward. I think that we hope that the proposals will be due by the end of February, that they get submitted. And this is where I think we have to know what that, after the end of January, how we want to proceed here. So this is, I admittedly probably going to be very open-ended, just because the exact process we want, if we receive 200 proposals, might be different if we're only sorting through 50. But we would like to take the proposals to the stakeholder groups, which is broader than the HRTC, in order to kind of reduce down the number of projects the HRTC is going to consider. Once that is done, we would like to make sure that there is community and resident outreach to flag projects of preference. So there's still that kind of community outreach and resident outreach as it speaks to the projects and not just the strategies. And then April through June, because this is ultimately has to be delivered to the state by the end of June, is this group, looking at all this input, taking the reduced number of projects that reduced projects that were sent down to from your stakeholder groups in order for us to select the handful of projects. One thing that we don't know is we have to wait for the state SFP is like how many projects we should submit as a region. I would say the fact that we have Catalyst, that the number of projects is probably reduced. I would say, like, hypothetically, we're probably looking at maybe 3 projects to submit from Orange County. Again, that's not set, but if you think about that the funding has been reduced because of Catalyst, there's now like less funding hypothetically for our region because this funding will go throughout the state. So this is just kind of a preliminary process. We want to think, are people kind of comfortable with this process? I know this is, again, broad framework and more details need to be fleshed out, but from a timeline perspective, does this make sense for I would think many of you would be involved in these. You would have your own proposals that you're involved in some sense. Obviously, your colleagues who might be interested in potentially SURF funding and what the process is generally, but curious again, do people have any thoughts, feedback? Do people generally like this idea of how we're going to go from soliciting projects from the whole community to us ultimately selecting our handful of projects that we will submit to the state for funding? Yes, Linda.
I'm following your progression, but when we get to it says early April, community outreach to identify projects of preference. Could you please elaborate on that? What do you see as the intention here? Because that sounds like
well, just like the outreach and engagement we're doing with strategies, we ultimately want to hear from, again, residents and other community stakeholders on what's going to work for them. This body is the final decision-making body. It's why it's diverse with all the different stakeholders. It's why it has residents directly to be advocates for those communities as well. But it would help for us not necessarily presume what the community thinks are the best projects, but we will have some sort of feedback, and then we will have to, of course, compare that to what the state deems to be the most successful projects in order to maximize, I guess, the spirit of what the community wants. And so we want that as they will not be selecting the projects, right? This body is the only one who has the authority to move the projects forward, but it would be helpful to see what the input is as to which projects would be most beneficial to the community and residents. I would say ultimately it's another form of input, right? We have a very diverse collective group, but it's another form of input for us to see really how are we going to maximize SURF funding on behalf of the region. Is that helpful, Linda?
It is. It sounds like a very, very heavy lift. And that's why the timeline is, I mean, I would just need to understand more precisely what the definition of the community outreach is at this stage. So it would probably be more like resident specific driven, but I wouldn't solely like limit that because, people who have, again, colleagues in their respective spaces may also want to participate in that. Right. So the whole point is that it's why the word is community. I know that's broad, but in the sense of we can't be really turning people away from providing input on what they would ultimately want to see. Yes, Josefa.
Yeah, Jesse. So I had the opportunity to participate in Sarah Middleton's process with outreach and engagement and selecting the O&E grantees with Tony and Linda, partly because, none of us were applicants. So that's how we ended up in that part of the decision making. And one of the things that I think was at the crux of the decision making was the rubric of sorts by which we look at these. And I think that's the most critical. I mean, not all of this is critical, the process and the outreach, but once these applications come in and they come to us, it's like, okay, how do we weigh these things? What's important? What's not? What's more important? What's less important? So, will that be also part of a process by which we're getting input from community, or how will that aspect of it be processed?
That is a great observation that I had not thought about. So thank you. That's the beauty of this group. I would say that the only thing, like, this isn't a conversation about rubric, as I mentioned, just because we want to see the states first, if they even apply any, because we obviously don't want to do anything that contradicts and therefore weakens it. But I think an idea in place to get input on, I think, yes, I will think of a process of trying to get broader input on the rubric. So I'll have to think that through. But again, I can only do so. I can't give you any dates or times until I know when the state is going to release their SFP, or unless they tell me they will not provide a rubric. I don't think that's likely, but I need to get more information on the state's timeline for us to deploy something like that. But thank you for bringing that to our attention, and I will come up with a strategy or plan and present that to all of you. Again, ultimately, as you know, Josefa, right, the rubric will be approved by this group. But of course, yes, the process of providing input to see what people want to see as a rubric, if we can absolutely make sure that happens. Any other kind of questions or comments?
I think Tony had some feedback on the chat.
I can't see the chat, but Melanie, and then let me probably pull up the chat so I can see.
Tony mentioned, I think there needs to be time for HRTC members to talk through the process and projects prior to the middle of the 2-pager. We shouldn't assume groups don't have projects. And then Melanie, go ahead. I see your hand up.
Yeah, I've been through this process with work at the statewide level, and I think based on the diversity of groups participating here, that if it would be helpful to come up with broad strategies, but then how do you compare an economic program or plan with an environmental one? And so if we have broad strategies and then kind of categories underneath it that have more specificity, we're in a learning process here. And so I think it's hard to say, yeah, let's do it this way, because we don't know what's going to be proposed by any of the groups submitting something, whether they're in the collaborative or not. And so I'm just aware of the fact that we can agree to something, but we may get a little bit more information later that we then need to shift our approach. And so I'm just hoping we build in some flexibility, but that we recognize it may not be the same comparing an economic project to an environmental project. So that's all.
No, I think that's totally fair. And this is where, I mean, Melanie, if we want to build in more, we absolutely can. But this is where like April through June, that's why we're allowing like 3 months of just like the discussions around these projects. I think try to make a case for those comparisons. Obviously, people, being strong advocates for certain projects and why they really like them. If we feel like we can modify this timeline, but that's why I think we're going to have at least 3 months, and whether that's 3 meetings or whether we can, maybe meet every other week, and there'll be 6 meetings total for us to just take some of the selected projects, but then really drill down. And again, maybe that's enough time for you to kind of bring up these things. But if it's not, of course, I want to hear from the group, and we can try to make some adjustments. But I would just also note that like this does have to be turned in by the end of June. So how we want to ultimately execute this, I'm open to recommendations. The balance of rushing things, moving too quickly versus, of course, not enough time to discuss. I'm very sensitive to that balance, and it's ultimately what the group wants as far as, again, frequency, time, versus, again, maybe like overdoing it per se, right? Kind of exhausting all of you with these meetings. So I'm open to that balance. So Mel, I don't know if that's helpful a little bit, but
yeah, no, and I'm not saying I disagree with anything. I'm just aware, having been through this process elsewhere. And it might be helpful to provide one example so that I just popped into my head as it relates to climate resilience. Because the environmental arena is my specialty, if you're acquiring land, you want that property to have a lot of trees, let's say. Mm-hmm. But if you're trying to restore land, you maybe don't want a lot of trees on it, so that you have the opportunity to add trees. So how do you score something still within the environmental arena where one way you want trees and the other way you don't want trees? And so it just, that level of specificity doesn't get fleshed out until you're actually in the weeds. So just aware of it. Happy to throw in my contributions when the time is necessary, but I support what's being proposed.
Thank you. So yeah, then Tony, and if you want to come on about what recommendations you have as far as the sequencing here, in order, so like we should meet, I guess recommendations that we should meet in January as an HRTC.
No, I was thinking
Okay.
actually not, and everyone should come that wants to, but
Okay.
I was thinking more the opportunity to have, you know, one or two conversations with groups that they would come in, because it isn't, you know, some groups are very experienced in advancing projects. And when you say to them, please send in a 2-pager, they've already gone to 5 funders and they're ready. And other groups may not naturally identify as I have a project. It may be something they've worked on for 3 years and they're ready to move forward on it, but they don't conceive of it in the same way. And so I wasn't thinking of having everyone here unless everyone wanted to, but I was thinking maybe office hours or a little webinar, and with the intent that people could actually talk through ideas with maybe some project people that have a little experience, and you know, to identify what stage they're in. Anyways, that was what the idea was.
Wonderful. And Christy, if you're still on, do you know, I'm sure the state's probably just been really bogged down with thinking through Catalyst, but is there going to be statewide kind of these like technical assistance calls? Because Tony, I think maybe at least someone from the state should probably be present on these calls. At least if the questions are about the state's SFP and questions versus our process, which I think, right, any members of the HRTC, myself, and California Forward could be kind of provide technical assistance there. But Christy, do you have a sense of whether there'll be, you know, statewide or interest in doing regional technical assistance trainings for people who have just particular questions about what a good project is and isn't?
That's actually a really great question. This is something that we haven't really thought about yet, but I can definitely bring it to Matt Phillips. Usually OPR would be the one to bring out these types, or perhaps even doing it at another community of practice meeting where everyone from the state would be invited. Yeah, I can definitely bring this to OPR.
So then, Tony, I think the idea, absolutely great idea, but then again, we'll talk to the state to see how we can complement whatever they choose to do. But I think we will absolutely do our own, but depending on, again, how it can be complementary to the state is what we'll have to just wait for them as they make their decisions.
And I think Sarah's mentioning something kind of like that in the chat as well. Like, I just want to be sure that it's like there's apprenticeship, there's pre-apprenticeship, and then there's even projects before that. So I want to be that very early place where people can just come and talk, even if they may not even know they have a project.
Okay, absolutely. So noted, and we'll, again, it won't be an HRTC meeting as you stated, but we will make sure that that is available to people once it's fully released.
Do we have any other comments or feedback?
Yeah, actually, it's in 2 different places though, isn't it, Jesse? The part 2 of the strategy that's due in June of 2024 is supposed to some extent identify priority projects. So that's one piece. And then secondly, there's phase 2 funding. Almost sounds like part 2, but phase 2 funding, which is a different grant, and that is to help to implement projects that are identified in the strategy. And that one, you need to have the HRTC agree that it's in alignment with it. So there's to me, there's 2 priority components. They're similar, but not identical.
Christy, if you're here, please chime in. My understanding is that the strategies and the selection of those projects that align with strategies have to be chosen by the end of June. They will then be executed and implemented post-June, but this group will have already have to pick them pre-June, or June at the latest. The state just allowing strategies and projects to be submitted at the same time with that June deadline. Christy, am I wrong? Or is just Tony have a better interpretation? Or Tony, it sounds like what I'm saying may not be, it may contradict kind of what you're saying a little bit.
Well, my understanding, and you're probably closer to the center of power, but in the early days, and certainly statute does not say that the HRTC has to identify projects. My interpretation was that when you get to the phase 2 grant, which we haven't seen the writing, so that's why it's open to so much interpretation. But phase 2, you may have even entities that haven't participated in the entire HRTC process coming forward to implement one of the projects that are identified in the regional strategy, and that they can go for that grant money. All they need, but what they do need is the HRTC to say, yes, that project that, you know, Bob Jones's nonprofit is advancing is in alignment with what our regional plan is. But maybe there's further thinking about it. But my understanding is that the phase 2 grant money is not limited to just the HRTC.
Right. Well, it's not limited to the HRTC. Like, so of course, anyone outside the HRTC could be a recipient of this funding. It's the HRTC that just decides the project. So that I agree with you. But Christy, then can you chime in on the timeline here? My understanding was that we are submitting projects to the state for funding, right? The HRTC is making that selection, but the awardee could be anyone by the end of June, or are we just able to embark upon the process to select projects after June with that implementation funding?
So I'll have to reach out to Matt Phillips to get the timeline or the specific timelines as well. So I'll get back to you all with that.
That's very helpful. So Tony, thanks for bringing that up, because that would, you know, I think provide a lot of relief actually to this whole process. I was under the impression that this group had to select those projects to submit to the state by the end of June, but let us let us obviously look at that again and come back to you.
Well, the other thing is we may want to think about offering the state some suggestions relative to that, because if this group is deciding the projects, we take a regional strategy and we knock it down to 4 things. I'm not sure that advances anything. I think you want to keep it up here and then allow for the maximum amount of implementation.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Yes, Anna.
Yeah, I was thinking similarly, like if we're able to even push back at those deadlines, because I'm having a hard time imagining if we are ahead of the game, how everybody else is doing. And then I just have to say that I still feel really confused, and I don't know if there's maybe a visual way, because I know there's catalyst projects and strategies, but I think what I'm understanding is we're talking strategies pretty soon after we hear the community input process. We're also talking industries at some point. So there's a lot of things we're trying to, there's industries, strategies, and then proposals and of projects. And then there's the catalyst, which will take perhaps a lot of those projects. And then there's an implementation phase. So maybe a visual, just to have it all in order would help.
Yeah, we will absolutely, I totally see how that's confusing. And I think we will try to create an infographic of the sequencing of things. Yes, but Anna, you're absolutely right. That's I'm not one to thrust on these ambitious timelines. It's just these are the state deadlines so far. To your point, like, you know, that's why the state was pretty firm at the time of an August 31st for regional plan part 1. They then pushed it back to December, I think, because to your point, maybe many regions were just nowhere near able to do that. However, the state was, you know, has been pretty firm that the longer you allow for planning, the less time you have to, like, for the projects to spend the actual projects to spend the money. And so that's why the state has been reluctant in pushing back the planning deadlines, because then it just shortens the time that the money can be spent on projects. I think maybe they can find a way to make that decision, but that's just what's been communicated so far. Again, Christy, if you want to chime in on any of that, please do.
You definitely hit it on the spot. There are a lot of other regions who have requested to push back the date, but unfortunately, there would not be enough time at the end to, like Jesse said, to spend down the funds.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? So
Jesse, I'm not sure if this is just for this topic, but I was wondering if we can have a quick like learning moment for me and a teaching moment from either you or Trista. I'm bringing this up because it might be helpful for other folks as well. But I feel like we voted on a lot of things today, and we voted on stuff before, but we're not voting on everything. And so, real quick, how do we decide? How do you decide what we're voting on and what we just discuss? Is voting on any decision coming from HRTC? Maybe just a quick highlight. That way it helps to sort of create context for every time these votes come up.
Yeah, and I think maybe then moving forward on agendas, I could probably note that, you know, we'll probably require a voting item. I think it's really like, you know, anything that requires, you know, moving forward on something, right? It's kind of has been required a vote of you. I've communicated things like that I'm hearing from the state and keeping people updated. That absolutely doesn't. But almost anything that is like that, I don't, how do I say, like, it's like part of the deliverable, right? Kind of like is not done without the support of the HRTC. And admittedly, I have added things just like recently that, or just even this meeting with the non-SERP related projects. And then maybe it was just my call, but I felt like that was too significant of a decision for just the regional convener to make onto whether we were going to consider those or not. So I'll admit, like, sometimes it's I make a judgment call, but it's almost like if it's significant in any way, the HRTC is, you know, reviewing, approving, or voting directly on the item. And others are just for information purposes only, for the sake of just transparency and awareness. But if you want, I can pull back past agendas and give you a list of things that have been voted.
But I think that was helpful. Just say, and that was no judgment on whether something was worth being voted on or not. It's simply I'm trying to understand what even looking back, what required it. And it sounds like there's some decisions that are made at the OCBC California Forward level, and then when it's required of like a group decision, obviously you're bringing it up here, right?
Yeah.
And I want to add too, a lot of the things too, and it's helpful to have this kind of in writing for consensus for the whole collective group and the governing body. And so when there's an item, like Jesse said, that requires something to move forward, or thoughts and opinions, this is where the place is for the group to say, hey, we like this, or we don't like this, or we like this with changes, or would like to see something added on to that layer. And so being able to give that opportunity for the voice and the consensus of the group, and how this region is moving forward on whatever projects or what you feel is best for your region. And so I think this is one of those helpful ways to be able to do so and get all the feedback in the consensus and the yays or the nays together at once.
Thank you.
So I think because, especially we're on time, actually, I think what Tony brought up was a great point. I think we actually need that clarified by this day, or I need to get clarification and bring that back all to you, because that could that could actually significantly like alter the timeline that was proposed. So let me confirm the interpretation. So I don't think we need to vote on this yet. Let me get that, and then we can reconsider it once we have confirmation from the state.
No problem.
Thank you for flagging that.
So we are at 10 a.m. We have the last two items to discuss the Catalyst programs and updates on the planning phase. Jesse, you want to move that to the next meeting?
Yes, I'll provide updates via email, and then we will kind of move those to the next meeting. But I will communicate a lot of the highlights via email for, of course, input and feedback from anyone electronically, or set up a time to call or call me. Happy to do that on a one-on-one basis.
Yes, absolutely. And Donna, I believe Emily has you notated for the votes for today. Well, thank you all for your time this morning. I hope you guys have a wonderful Friday and a wonderful weekend. And you guys take care and see you later. See you at our next meeting. Bye-bye.